Have you ever found yourself deep cleaning your kitchen to avoid sending a single email? Reorganizing your closet instead of calling to make a doctor's appointment? Maybe doing a project that's due next month to avoid writing a paper that's due this week? While procrastination doesn't appear in the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for ADHD, if you're here, you know what I'm talking about. If procrastination was an Olympic sport, people with ADHD would take all the medals. We tend to beat ourselves up about procrastination, chalking it up to being lazy or lacking discipline, or maybe thinking we just suck at life. But that's bullshit. And today we're going to talk about why. Welcome to ADHD Adultish. I'm Kim Spangler, and I'm an ADHD coach. I, too, am an expert procrastinator. If you have been stuck in the endless loop of I'll do it later, grab one of those 3 drinks you've got sitting next to you, get comfy, and let's talk about why ADHD brains love to procrastinate, the sneaky ways it can show up, and some ADHD-friendly strategies to break the cycle that don't involve relying on willpower. What if I told you that procrastination isn't actually a problem of time management or motivation at all? Current research suggests that procrastination is often about emotional regulation. It's not about avoiding the task itself, it's about avoiding the uncomfortable feelings that come with it. Maybe that's guilt over not having done it yet. Maybe it's overwhelm at just how many steps are involved. Maybe it's the fear of not doing it perfectly. Maybe the task involves some sort of sensory issue, like avoiding cooking that chicken you got for dinner because touching raw meat gives you the big icks. For people with ADHD, these emotions can be big, and often we don't realize what the feeling is or what's causing it. We just know we feel it, and it's associated with that task that we are putting off. So what do? Well, we keep pushing the task away for a little bit of relief. It's like emotional whack-a-mole. You smack down one uncomfortable feeling and move on to something else, like deep cleaning your bathroom or watching every YouTube video ever made about otters. The problem is that short-term relief keeps us locked in a cycle of avoidance. So every time we dodge a task and feel that little dopamine boost of, I don't have to think about that right now, we're reinforcing the habit. Meanwhile, the actual task is still there, watching us from our to-do list with all the judginess of a cat glaring at you because you're 15 minutes late feeding him dinner. So if procrastination is really about avoiding uncomfortable emotions, it makes sense that ADHD brains are pros at it. Emotional regulation is one of the biggest challenges we face, which means any task, big or small, that triggers uncomfortable feelings is a good candidate for procrastinating. This can show up in different ways, though. For example, as with most ADHD things, dopamine can be a big factor. Our brains are chronically dopamine deprived, so we're constantly on the search for things that are interesting, new, or urgent, because those are the things that are going to give us the dopamine boost we're missing. Unfortunately, boring but necessary tasks don't usually make that cut. That's why the boredom of folding laundry feels literally painful, but learning everything about the history of surfing at 2 a.m. feels like a great time. Without enough dopamine to kickstart motivation, even simple tasks can feel like trying to roll a boulder uphill. Perfectionism is another layer of the procrastination puzzle. For a lot of people with ADHD, it's all or nothing. If I can't do this perfectly, I might as well not do it at all. Even small tasks turn into massive undertakings because our brains are constantly rewriting that task from do this thing to do this thing flawlessly or don't even bother. This kind of black and white thinking it's exhausting, and it makes starting damn near impossible sometimes. And let us not forget rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. Basically, a lot of extra syllables to say our brains react very strongly to criticism, both real and imagined. So if there's a chance that a task might not turn out perfectly, our brains go, oh, cool, I guess I'll just avoid that entirely so I don't have to feel like a failure. Problem solved. And if this was a movie, that would be the point where we hear Morgan Freeman's voiceover telling us that the problem was not, in fact, solved. If all that's not enough, there's always our old friend analysis paralysis. This is when having too many options or too many steps makes our brains freeze up like a computer running Windows Vista. Google it, kids. You know, that feeling when you open your email inbox and see 87 unread messages. Get completely overwhelmed and immediately close your laptop and decide that's a problem for future you to deal with. Your brain can't figure out which step to take first, so it just nopes right out of there. So, yeah, when you add it all together, it's no wonder we end up putting things off. But we don't just procrastinate by not doing the task, right? Because why would you just avoid a task when you can avoid it creatively? Let's talk about the unholy trinity of procrastiplanning, procrastilearning, and procrastivity. These are the sneaky forms of procrastination that trick us into feeling accomplished without actually having made progress on the thing that we really need to do. Let's start with procrastiplanning. That's when you spend all your time planning to do something instead of actually doing it. Maybe you made the perfect to-do list, color-coded your planner, created a detailed spreadsheet with multiple tabs and complicated formulas that you will never end up using. It feels productive, but the reality is you're just pushing off the actual task. Our brains love this because it gives us that nice dopamine boost without any of that emotional discomfort that's coming along with doing the thing. Then we've got procrastilearning. This is when you convince yourself that you can't start the task until you have watched every YouTube tutorial, read every blog post, and taken a deep dive into the internet's darkest corners to learn just a little bit more. It is a rabbit hole, and it is a favorite of our brains because, well, hyperfocus. The problem is, we end up with 75 million ideas duking it out for attention on our brain and zero actual progress. Learning feels productive, and don't get me wrong, learning, of course, can be an important part of doing a task. But at a certain point, it can become just another way to dodge getting on with doing the thing. And then there's procrastivity. This is when you avoid a priority task by doing less important but still productive tasks, like, cleaning the house instead of making that phone call you needed to make to get a repairman out for your cable or schedule a doctor's appointment, reorganizing your entire Google Drive to avoid doing that work project that you don't want to do. This productive procrastination tricks us into feeling accomplished while we're still avoiding the real task. We get that dopamine hit for checking stuff off the list, but the list is mostly things that didn't really need to be done right now. So all of these are just different flavors of the same problem, avoiding emotional discomfort, whether it's the anxiety of not doing it perfectly, the overwhelm of figuring out where to start, or just plain boredom. These sneaky strategies just give us a way to sidestep the issue without feeling quite so much like we're slacking off. Now, if that all sounded like a whole lot of doom and gloom, don't worry. This is the part where I give you ideas on how to outsmart your brain and stop avoiding the important stuff without relying on that myth that is willpower. All right, first up, regulate first, act second. This tip is all about dealing with the emotional roadblocks before you even try to start the task. If a task feels overwhelming or anxiety-inducing, it's a sure sign that your brain may try to sidestep it. So take a minute, literally, to do something that calms you down. Pause, maybe do some deep breathing, take a quick walk, or put your headphones on and listen to a song that gets you hyped. Once your brain isn't spiraling, it should be a little easier to get started. This thing, by the way, should not involve looking at an electronic device because watching TikTok Reels is not the way to emotionally regulate yourself into doing the thing. Next tip, remove the roadblocks. And I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally remove the stuff that's making the task harder. That may be gathering all the supplies you need and putting them in one spot. That may be turning Do Not Disturb on your phone so that notifications don't keep going off. That may be talking to your boss and getting clarification on what needs to be done on the task. That may be body doubling or talking to your coach and having them help you organize your thoughts and figure out steps. Basically, all of the things that make your brain say, ugh, we need to get rid of. We're more likely to get started on a task if it feels easy to get rolling. Speaking of getting rolling, find the most fun or interesting step. If the task is boring, our brains are going to fight it. So trick your brain. Find a part of the task that feels even slightly interesting and start there instead of whatever you think is the beginning. Make it less awful and you're way more likely to start. And then there's the classic, make it tiny. We're talking bite-sized, so small it barely counts levels of manageable. If the task feels overwhelming, shrink it down to the smallest action possible. Don't write the report. Open a document and name it and write the first sentence, or write a sentence that's going to go in it somewhere. Just plan to start a little. The odds are good that once you're in motion, it's going to be easier to keep going. Which leads me to the next one, the 2-minute rule. If it's a task that you're putting off that's going to take less than 2 minutes, don't think. Don't give yourself 1 second to think about it. Just do a 3, 2, 1, go countdown and on go launch. This one is good because it gives us that exciting little urgency of the countdown. I don't know why. It feels silly when you do it, but I have done it and it actually does. It works. It's kind of one of those things where it's annoying that this works, but it does. And plus, if you're knocking off a short little task, it gives you a quick win, gets you a little dopamine hit, and makes it easier to go on to the next thing. While we're at it, work on reframing your mindset. Perfectionism is a giant middle finger to productivity. If you're stuck because you're worried about doing something perfectly, keep focusing on progress is better than perfection. Repeat it until you believe it. Of course, there are the old standbys, of if it's a boring task, pair it with something you like watching Netflix while folding laundry or listening to a podcast while doing the dishes. Your brain gets a little dopamine boost from the fun thing and makes the boring thing suck a little less. Body doubling is, of course, always one of my favorites. Doing tasks alongside someone else, either in person or virtually, just makes it easier to start because you're like borrowing someone else's motivation for a bit. Even if it's just a Zoom call or a FaceTime where you and a friend are both working on your own stuff in silence, having another human presence can help you anchor to the task. Okay, so we've covered why ADHD brains procrastinate. I gotta tell you, having to say the word procrastinate so many times is really not that easy. It seems like it's just fine, and then you write a script and end up saying it a whole lot, and man, that's a lot of syllables. Okay, so we have covered why our brains put things off, the sneaky ways we do it, and some strategies that don't rely on pure willpower to get stuff done. Now it's time to turn the spotlight on you for a second with some reflection questions to help you figure out what might actually work for your brain. Because if you try to force yourself to use strategies that don't fit, it's not going to work any better than relying on willpower. First question. Think about a task that you've been avoiding and then think about what emotion comes up when you think about it. Just pause for a minute, close your eyes, and think about doing the task. What do you feel and where in your body are you feeling it? Figuring out the emotion behind the avoidance is going to be the first step to picking a strategy that helps. For example, if you are avoiding writing an email because you're worried about saying the wrong thing, maybe a strategy like regulating first by taking a few deep breaths or doing a quick body doubling session can help. If you're putting it off because the thought of opening your inbox makes you want to throw your laptop out a window, that could be overwhelm, which means breaking it down into tiny steps or using the 2-minute rule might work better. The idea is to match the strategy to the feeling and not just to the task. Hopefully that makes sense. Second reflection question. I want you to think about which type of procrastination do you fall into most often? Are you a procrastiplanner? Do you spend all your time making to-do lists and schedules instead of actually doing the thing? Procrastilearning? Do you like to deep dive down those endless research rabbit holes? Or maybe it's not productive procrastination. Maybe it's watching endless Instagram reels, playing video games, or binge watching your favorite TV show. Knowing your favorite flavor of procrastination makes it easier to spot when it's happening and cut it off before it turns into a whole day of avoidance. Half the battle is just recognizing the behavior. And finally, think about if you have caught yourself doing productive procrastination lately. How did it make you feel? Did doing the other tasks make you feel productive even though you were avoiding the main thing? Or did it leave you feeling like you were just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic? So, what's one strategy that we talked about today that you're willing to try this week? Pick one thing that sounds doable and give it a shot. The worst that can happen is that it doesn't work, which is where you were at anyway. And then you can move on to trying the next method. The goal isn't to do everything perfectly. It's just to do something. One small win to break the cycle of avoidance and get a little dopamine boost, because if you can build even a tiny bit of momentum, it gets a lot easier to keep going. So that's the podcast this week. Bottom line, procrastination is not going anywhere. But if you can start to understand why you're avoiding something and use strategies that take that reason into account, you can break the cycle a little easier. Even small, messy progress is a win. So your challenge for this week is to pick a strategy, just one, and try it out. And if you need some extra help kicking procrastination's ass, grab my Quick Wins playbook. It's free. It's packed with simple strategies for building momentum, and it's all about scoring those small wins that give your brain that much needed dopamine boost. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe and leave a review. Thank you for hanging out with me today. Until next time, remember to give yourself credit for every step forward, strive for progress over perfection, and don't forget, you're awesome and you've got this.